Alright, so we're following Dowd's clean and jerk, and so now we're on the jerk portion of his lift. So we're going to take a look at this. Let's first start with kind of his dip. So as he dips, not too bad. His chest is tall, he's loading his hips and legs pretty well. He looks pretty balanced. I like his dip position. Going into it, he might be able to work on a couple things. So that bottom position looks good. But as he dips, he definitely kind of lets the shoulders dip forward, hips dip back a little bit more, and then he kind of pushes the knees forward. So he ends up kind of correcting that angle. I don't know if you can see, but right now he's got a little bit of an angle. And then as his knees push forward, now he's more upright than what he just was. So a good way to fix that is you need the hips to be back a little bit to be able to sit down. So right before he goes into that dip, what he can do is he can shift his hips back slightly over his heels to kind of free up the hip movement, and then let the knees dip forward. That way the hips can go ahead and hinge, but you're starting from an upright position as opposed to doing the hips then knees. So set the hips where you want them and then bend the knees. That way those hips can drop straight down. He ends up in a pretty good dip and drive position. I haven't seen too many other of his lifts, so that might not be that big of a deal, but something to keep in mind for other lifters. As he drives, he's driving straight up. He's finishing his drive really well. This looks good so far. He's staying relatively close to the ground, and then he pushes under, and so he's a power jerker. There's definitely looks like just some mobility issues here. So as far as like his drive and his catch, that all looks really, really good. But we definitely have some imbalances in his hips. This right side looks like it's in a pretty good position. His left side looks definitely a little bit maybe high from this position. And his knees look like they're caving in a little bit. So it looks like everything is kind of loading on that right leg a little bit more than the left. So it looks like he needs to do a little bit of hip mobility to try to free up that left hip, especially if he has some power jerks that day. Probably not a bad idea because that might be an imbalance in some of the squats as well. So he drives, he catches, he loads that right side. So watch the whole lift. I'm going to drag that. The whole lift kind of drifts that direction. And then as he recovers, he's recovering towards that right foot. You should be able to just stand straight up from that, and then maybe walk your feet in if you want to. So he definitely has some like imbalances there in the hips. You might want to check some of his thoracic imbalance too. Something that might also help that is if he ever wants to maybe have the option of squatting into that jerk, maybe not jumping out so wide. As you jump really, really wide, you kind of start reaching limitations of your hip mobility there. So him jumping so wide might be what's winding up that left hip a little bit too. So you can maybe work on keeping the feet a little bit closer, giving him the option of being able to push down more. But for sure needs to work on some of that freeing up that hip, that left hip specifically.